Good morning. We are live. It's Garland Nixon and Joti Brar on a Friday morning for episode 2. Let's talk. Good morning, all. We are here with Joti Brar. She is representing the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist. Joti, we are not worthy to be in your presence. Well, I'll just speak for myself. The rest of the people in the chat are, but I'm not. Joti, it's wonderful that you've taken time out of your busy schedule for another Friday to talk with us about imperialism and all things empire-related. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Garland. It's always nice to be with you. I'm always nervous when you big me up that's the sure sign that I'm going to say something really stupid, but it's very nice to talk with you today.
Well, if you say something really stupid, then that will align itself quite well with this channel because I do that on a very frequent basis. But let's get right to it. You know, the Red Sea, what's happening with Ansar Allah, the people of Yemen, and their ability to cause, major problems for the imperialists. I think there's something, to me, I don't know what it is. There's something metaphorical there, that people who are impoverished, that people who have been attacked by the empire, standing up to the empire, pushing back, and in this day and age, demonstrating that because of their geopolitical location and their belief in what they have to do, their belief in what they're fighting for. The power of that has basically brought the empire to its knees in a way. Everyone knows that this move in the Red Sea can have just a crushing effect on the economy of the U.S. empire and its vassals. Anyway, your thoughts on at least the metaphorical importance of what's happening in the Red Sea?
I mean, it's not even metaphorical, is it? It's very practical and very real. For me, it's a wonderful example of two things. Number one, just a truism in life: oppression breeds resistance, right? The more heavily people are pushed down on, the more you can guarantee one thing, which is eventually they're going to fight back. And, you've seen that with Palestine, of course, as the epicenter of the Middle Eastern struggle for liberation. But this struggle is like a hydra. It has many heads. There are many boots that come down on the, different parts of the Middle East by the imperialist monster. There's many separate struggles fighting back. But all of them have, over the years, increasingly come to realize that their struggle is centered in Palestine, because Zionism is the main weapon that the imperialists use to control all of the Middle East. They're not there to control Palestine, they're there to control the region. And increasingly, the people who've been oppressed by imperialism in the Middle East have come to understand that. And therefore, they understand that the Palestinian struggle is theirs, not in a kind of abstract solidarity way, but in a very concrete, it's the epicenter of what's happening to all of those people of the Middle East. And because of that learning that's gone on through the resistance forces, remember, this is a story which is more than 100 years old. This story begins at the end of the Second World War with the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. And what happened to the Ottoman Empire? How do we know exactly what went on with the breakup of the Ottoman Empire? It's because the October Revolution, after the Bolsheviks came to power, they published the secret treaties that had been entered into by the Allied powers when they went into World War I. World War I was fought in trenches, in Flanders. But it wasn't about winning control of trenches in Flanders. It was about groups of imperialists clashing over who was going to get to control which bits of the world for the purposes of looting, exploiting, you know, getting as much money as possible, essentially. And when they entered into an alliance, the Allied powers in World War I on the British side, which also ended up being the American side, belatedly, but in the beginning it was a European war. The Americans kind of came in to clean up at the end, but it was a European war, and Britain, Russia and France had secret treaties where they agreed how they were going to carve up the possessions of the empires they were fighting. Like, if we come out on top, this is how we're going to do it. And there was all sorts of agreements they'd made behind the backs of the people who lived in those places about who was going to get what part of the Middle East. So we know about that, those deals that were made. That's the beginning of this story. And, you know, it's taken a long time. There have been a lot of bitter struggles that have taught the masses through their own suffering. They've learned these lessons in blood, that their struggles, in order to be successful, must be coordinated, must recognize that there will be no security for any of them until there's security for all of them. That's essentially it. You know, there've been long periods where people just have to live with how things are for now, but all of them know, you know, Iran has known all the time of its existence that it's not secure, that the imperialists want to destroy its independence. As a consequence, it has had to be a base for resistance forces in the Middle East. It has supported those resistance forces, not out of its desire to expand beyond its borders, which is the way the imperialists always describe these things, but out of a need to fortify itself and to help develop the Arab and Middle Eastern liberation movements in order that it can survive. Right? The only long-term future for Iran as an independent country is with all the countries in the region also becoming independent and ceasing to threaten it. Right? For as long as those countries are not independent, they have ruling classes who are proxies of the West, who will engage in wars against it, as Iraq did in the 1980s, who will coordinate with the imperialists to crush it, whether it's through economic or military means. And that's the same story for all the resistance forces in the Middle East. And so they've learned these lessons in a long and painful way. And the fact that, you know, we in the West, reading Western newspapers and living in a Western world, haven't understood this process has been going on, that's our problem. That's not their problem. You know, it just means that many people are taken by surprise when they see, you know, for example, Yemen, the most recent, you know, difficulty for the Yemeni people. Again, they've got a long, complex history of struggling against imperialism, winning liberation, getting reconquered. You know, it's been going on a very long time. But the most recent period where the USA decided to crush an independent government in Yemen more than a decade ago, and they used Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis as their local proxy armies to do that, it backfired massively on the Saudis and the Emiratis doing that, and the USA didn't get its way. But you know, the Yemenis have been fighting the most horrific war that's been almost invisible in the consciousness of the people of the West. It's hardly ever mentioned, and occasionally when it is, when the outrages get too bad, when the suffering of the people from diseases that have been forced on them by the way that the West has been blockading the country, literally trying to starve them into submission, literally starving them, so that, you know, millions of people were suffering from food shortage, millions, hundreds of thousands were actually starving, massive cholera epidemics, none of this talked about, right? Occasionally a charity raised its head and said, do you know that the worst humanitarian disaster on the planet is in Yemen? And for 5 minutes, it's a talking point, and we say, oh, we should do something. And then it kind of, in people's heads, it's just like, oh, Yemen's a very poor country, or even Yemen's the poorest country in the world. Like we say, well, Afghanistan's the poorest country in the world. What these countries got in common, Garland? Afghanistan, you know, and anywhere you look that's the poorest country in the world, you can bet your bottom dollar imperialism is doing something really, really, really nasty to the people there. So I've gone off on a big one, haven't I? That really what I want to come back to is the Yemeni resistance is not a new phenomenon. It's a culmination of a wider Middle Eastern movement and a historical process. It's also the culmination of a decade's worth of fighting on behalf of the people in Yemen to defend their right to choose their government and choose their future and have a sovereign existence as a people. And it is actually disgusting the way Western media, when they do talk about Yemen, they refer to the leaders of independent Yemen as Houthis. Why do they do that? Because they want, as in so many other places, they want to give the impression that it's a purely religious, purely tribal, sectarian, kind of fringe movement. When in fact, the forces that we see now patrolling in the Red Sea, capturing Israeli boats, targeting even American warships with their bombs, these are the forces of the National Army of Yemen. Despite everything that's been done to Yemen, the Northern Territory remains liberated, and it is home. Sana'a, a beautiful ancient city, is home to a national government. It is not some, ragtag gang of tribalists in a corner. They might be poor, they might struggle with equipment, but they have overcome incredible odds to keep their sovereignty, and they have understood that their struggle and the Palestinian struggle are one, and they have entered with the most heroic bravery fully into that struggle. And I am sure it's giving so much heart to the people in Palestine, as well as all across the Middle East, to see the images, even just the videos of, the army training with a beautiful song about Palestine in the background will be lifting the spirits of people all across the Middle East to see in practice, how these movements put their money where their mouth is. And as you said, the damage it's doing to not just Israeli, but imperialist economics is actually huge.
Something else that I think is important, and that is the recognition, here or in the West, we are trained to focus on some leader. Generally there's a country that now has been determined adversarial. So we know whatever country that is, the leader is a dictator. And we must actually free the people by bombing them or starving them, things like this, from this evil dictator. And here in the United States, as we see, or anywhere in the West, when we see our country falling to ruin, it's the result of the wrong leader. The system's fine. The manager of the system needs to go from Joe Biden to Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump, fill in the blank, or one of the parties. You see the Republican Party, they're saying the Democratic Party is mismanaging the system, blah, 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 right? It's all about the party or the system, the party or the person, most likely the person. Okay. It seems to me that the resistance realized something, that a Joe Biden is just a mask for these global financial capital people, right? That he's just a mask for power. And then rather than punch at Joe Biden, he's a jerk, he's an idiot, Rishi Sunak is this, or Macron, or laugh at Olaf Scholz, as I love to do. So I just enjoy, laughing at Olaf Scholz. So forgive me, guilty pleasures. But my point being, they actually realize that if you want to punch at these people, you have to punch at the financial power. And that's what they're doing, which the people, unfortunately, on the streets in the West don't seem to realize. Now, I will say this, the other thing, they're boycotting Starbucks or McDonald's or whatever. They realize it is the economic power and the corporate power that is really where the strength is, and that these leaders are just falsehoods. They're just fakes thrown out there to give. So that I'll put it like this. They give us a punching bag. I can punch Joe Biden or an effigy or burn an effigy of Joe Biden all day long, which he's literally an effigy of himself at this point. And they can sit back and say, you're going after the puppets and we're the puppeteers. But the Ansar Allah, the Yemeni people, the resistance who are boycotting Starbucks, these people realize that the real power is in these corporate oligarchical figures. At any rate, go ahead. Your thoughts on that?
I would go further than saying they're giving us a punching bag. I would say they're giving us an entire distraction circus. And it is a huge machinery of distraction over here, while the real people who are making the real decisions are far away over here, and they're behind a door. You don't know who they are. You don't know what decisions they're making. None of it is covered anywhere in your media. Not the people, not the decision-making process, not the decisions that they've taken. None of it. Over here, we've got this whole charade of bourgeois democracy, elections, the media that covers it and keeps us busy looking at it and tells us that somehow it's all got to do with the personalities of this or that, leader. And they do the same with history, right? How many times have you heard analyses of Hitler's personality, his childhood, his diet, for God's sake, right? As if this somehow has some significance for how World War II happened. In Marxism, there's an understanding that every state is a dictatorship. Because a state machine, by its very nature, is a machinery for the holding down of one class by another. That's how you get social peace. Social peace comes about because one class is successfully holding down the other, and it's not breaking out into open conflict all the time, right? So, it's a useful, in a class society, you have to have a state machine to hold the class antagonisms in check and to hold down the oppressed class. So in the slave owning society, there was a state machinery to make sure that the slaves stayed in their place. In a feudal society, there was a state machinery to make sure that the serfs stayed in their place. Now, in capitalist society, we have a state machinery to make sure that the working class stays in its place. And in a state, you have a dictatorship of one class over another. And the question, therefore, is which class is having the dictatorship? So in a capitalist class, we have a dictatorship of capital over the workers. We also have democracy for the capitalists. They get to debate and vote and have input into decisions, right? Although even there, what we find is the more that monopoly develops, the more that a smaller and smaller and smaller section of the ruling class, that the owners of the biggest monopoly corporations and these days it's like hedge funds, isn't it, that are just so huge, right, that they've got a controlling stake in so much, not just of the national economy, but of the world economy, that there's a tiny handful of people who really are between themselves having a say. It's democracy for them, right? Increasing numbers of even small bourgeois are finding themselves outraged by how outside of the decision-making process they are, right? But the bourgeoisie has the papers, the pages of the paper open to it. The bourgeoisie has editorial input into the media, in a way that the working class doesn't. The working class is a victim of a media machinery, and it's a massive machinery of manipulation and confusion, distraction and diversion. But these people who the imperialists put on the front of their system, that's exactly what they're servants. They're not the ruling class. They're not the real owners of the world's wealth. They are servants of the rulers of the world. They're very well paid servants. They're bought and paid for. They get big fat bribes to be loyal servitors for the system, right? I kind of call them the Mandarin class. You've got a whole section of people who work in the machine of keeping the system going as its front people. So some of them are in the media and some of them are in politics, but they're interchangeable, a lot of them, in terms of their role. They're talking heads for the system, and they're there to prettify it. They're there to prettify it. And you're absolutely right that when it comes to the resistance, the things that they start to realize from bitter experiences, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, it doesn't matter who's in the White House. It doesn't matter who's sitting in the chair in number 10. That is not what's going to change the parameters of the struggle for liberation for these people. because imperialism is not the policy that's decided by the guy who we elect. It isn't. So imperialism is a system. It's not a policy, number one. And number two, in terms of kicking the imperialists out of your country in order to get sovereignty, that's something that can only be done, as you said, by defeating the imperialists in a way that they can't respond to anymore. So you're right, it's financial, it's military, it's technological. You know, the controls that the imperialists have on our lives essentially come through the economics of the system, but it's backed up by military, and the military supremacy comes from technological supremacy. So these are the targets. You know, I saw a really interesting article about the Yemeni fight against Americans in the Red Sea, and how the Americans are kind of saying, or the US, I should say, people from the rest of America get very cross when you call the USA the Americans. The US authorities or military is kind of trumpeting about the fact that they're able to defeat, you know, shoot down missiles that the Yemenis are sending their way in the Red Sea. But one of the commentaries I read was very interesting. It said the economics of this do not add up, because the missiles that the US is launching to defeat a Yemeni missile cost millions of dollars each a time. And the ones that and they can't replace them quickly. You know, the USA has a really messed up military situation. Maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. But they can't just fire them forever. You know, they haven't just got a limitless supply of these things. On the other hand, the weapons, the missiles that the Yemenis are sending cost a couple of $1,000s to produce, and they can produce them in hidden factories, even without electricity. So they've worked out a way to produce, you know, these are the kind of lessons. This is what asymmetric warfare does. You know, it applies the creativity of the people to apparently insurmountable problems. It says, well, look, we're not prepared to just give up. So we have to resist. So look, we've got all these problems. We're going to have to work out the weaknesses of our enemy. We're going to have to work out what are our strengths and figure out what we can do. And you saw exactly the same thing with the launch of the Al-Aqsa flood operation in Palestine, how that had been planned, how the Palestinian resistance had worked out exactly what were the weaknesses in the system that was supposed to keep them penned in. Well, the Yemenis have done the same. Clearly, they've done the same and understood how they can fight an asymmetric battle against US-backed forces. And by the way, in both cases, with the Palestinians and with the Yemenis, the leaders of the resistance make it very clear they understand that ultimately, and just like the Russians when they're fighting in Ukraine, they know that ultimately they're fighting the imperialists, ultimately they're fighting the USA. They know that. They make that really, really clear that they get that. And that's a really important, you know, advance. It's a really important message for people in the West to understand as well.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. And the other thing is, I think that's interesting about the resistance in Yemen, and that is that, I mean, in the Middle East, and that is that much of it is carried out not only without state actors and state leadership, but in spite of state actors and state leadership that is, you know, has been co-opted by the West. So not, you know, Hezbollah, Hamas. Again, Yemen, you can argue that it's a state actor or a non-state actor, depending on, you know, they've struggled to become a state actor to take back their country, but, you know, whether or not they fully have it, they're still, you know, a puppet government in part of Yemen that they're struggling against. But your thoughts on how kind of the people have come together? Do they have some financial and technological backing from some state actors? Possibly, maybe even likely. But the point is, it seems to be a kind of a loosely affiliated groups. If you look at in Iraq, there's these private military units. You know, you see what I'm getting at, that it doesn't take a state actor to push back against imperialism, and quite possibly it's more effective if there's not a state actor, because the state can come in and co-opt their, you know, with their vassals, and co-opt any resistance. Anyway, your thoughts on all of that, Joti Brar?
I mean, you put your finger on something. What were we talking about? It came to me and went away again. Yeah, so in terms of the, oh, you're muted, Garland. In terms of the resistance forces, it comes back to what we were saying at the beginning. Of course, oppression breeds resistance, and if the state that's being targeted or that you live in is not representing your needs and you need to resist, eventually you'll find a way to do it. When it comes to the methods and the means, you know, we talked about the creativity of the masses. Ultimately, it is the masses who make history. And once the masses begin to move and organize themselves, they're an incredibly powerful force, you know. And once they begin to feel that power, it's very difficult to hold them back. You know, people talk a lot about different resistance forces in the Middle East being proxies for Iran, is what they usually say. But it seems quite clear to me that that's not how it is. Do we think there's been some sharing of experience and technologies? I'm sure there has. And not just between Iran and various groups, but between the groups amongst themselves, and maybe even outside those borders. You know, just that I'm sure anyone in that kind of position is willing to learn from anyone else who's been in a similar position. And, you know, we'll pick up on tips and tricks, and, you know, how to build a factory underground with no electricity, for example. You know, I mean, for all we know, they've got, you know, Vietnamese help or Korean help in doing that, because these are people who had to learn how to fight, you know, war against overwhelming enemies using all kinds of simple technologies, but the power of the masses, you know. So who knows? I mean, it's just a pure speculation on my part. We don't know. They're not telling us. They're not broadcasting it. But the narrative that's sold to us that there's no way these people could do anything unless Iran was backing them is nonsense, you know. And information is not, you know, the imperialists try to, they always talk about intellectual property, you know, as if information is owned by somebody.
Right. Your thoughts are owned by someone, you know, your beliefs, your culture, all of that. I'll add this. One of the discussions I have had about neoliberalism is the everything has a price on it. Literally, I was working in with the Department of Natural Resources in Maryland, and they came down to say, okay, the deer are owned by the people, which really didn't mean the people, it meant the oligarchs. But they said, we're going to put a value on every deer, a financial value, so that if somebody illegally kills a deer, that we can say that deer is worth $175, so you have to pay the state $100. Well, wait a minute. I thought the people owned that deer. Don't you have to pay the people $175? No, if you illegally kill a deer hunting or something like that, you now have to pay extra. So it is putting a financial value on everything. And I think that aligns with what you were saying.
It's the only language the imperialists understand, of course, but this desire to control technology and to profit from everything combines to create this world of intellectual property. You know, but it's a nonsense, really, because anyone who invents something is only building on, you know, all the things that humanity have done up to that point, a little tiny bit. You know, and every human has the capability that we do it in our lives all the time. This is what's so fantastic about human beings, right? We are very creative, and we take what we've been given and we fiddle around with it, you know. Well, the collective efforts of humanity have been very creative, have got us to where we are, and will take us further. But the idea that you get to a certain point and, you know, everybody who does a little bit more onto what humanity has done so far can, you know, own that little bit and say anything to do with this belongs to me and you're not allowed to touch it. You know, it's a peculiarly capitalist notion, and you know, it's a very outdated one. It's holding back our economy in, you know, hundreds of ways that we won't talk about now. But so they have this idea about intellectual property, but the reality is that once technology is in the world, you can try and police technology as much as you like. It doesn't work. Once it's out there, it's out there, you know, and the imperialists are always foaming at the mouth and trying to blame somebody for how technology got in somebody's hands. But it's like, it's in the world, it's going to get in people's hands. You know, you can do everything you want to try to control it, to try to shame people out of trying to, you know, find out how to do things that humanity's worked out how to do, but it's not going to work. You're not going to, it's like, it's the classic King Canute standing on the beach telling the tide to go back. You know, it's not going to happen.
I certainly agree with you on that. But let me ask you this. So, because we're talking about the Middle East, that's on the forefront, and it's very important in the discussion of imperialism for obvious reasons. When you look at what's going on in Gaza, you know, the U.S. empires, you know, supporting this, you know, obvious genocide, and even the people of America, the people of the U.S. are like, hey, we don't like this. Overwhelmingly, the people of the world are like, we don't like this. But the Israeli project, I'll call it that, Zionist project, is so critical to imperialism that they're willing to give up everything. You know, their standing in the world, their political standing, it's creating political chaos at home. Why is this particular imperialist project so important to the US empire that they're willing to sacrifice so much for it? Your thoughts?
Oil. OIL, oil. You know, fundamentally, oil still has not been, despite all of the campaigning by all of the, you know, stop oil type people, oil has not been replaced as the most significant commodity in the global economy. Significant, but because it powers a lot of industry, significant because it powers the war machinery. And so controlling oil, making sure that you have the supplies that you need as an imperialist power, but also trying to stop your rivals getting hold of oil. This is one of the major concerns of the imperialists, and therefore explains a huge amount of the kind of geopolitical map, if you like. If you look at the world and see, you know, where the disputes are going on, see where wars happen, see where governments get changed, you know, a hell of a lot of it will relate back to oil, gas, pipeline routes, you know, something to do with the flow, the exploitation, the flow, the control of supplies of oil. And keeping oil flowing cheaply to the imperialists and keeping the imperialist monopoly control over the global supplies of oil is a major kind of strategic goal of imperialism, and it's existential for imperialism. If they're not able to do that, they start to have serious problems in terms of maintaining their economic and military power in the world. So the importance of Zionism is that it is the imperialist military base in the middle of the world's most oil-rich zone. That is the significance. That is why the Zionists have been given a license to commit any crime for 75 years. Now, these crimes and this mentality aren't new. You know, there are now videos, well, and it's not that new, but, you know, there have been videos circulating for some time where people have gone and interviewed still living members of the Israeli forces. Some of them were official, some of them were kind of unofficial militias who carried out what the Palestinians call the Nakba, the first big ethnic cleansing operation, which was 75 years ago, so 76, in Palestine. And the crimes that they committed and the way they talk about those crimes were just as horrific as what is happening today. They were buried. The information about that, you know, was completely suppressed in the rest of the world. The story that was built up around Israel was a million miles away from the reality. And it's taken 75 years of Palestinian resistance to Zionism for the truth to seep out in trickly bits here and there over the years. And over the years, not only has little bits of truth been seeping out and building up and building up and building up a clearer and clearer picture of the truth about Palestine and Israel, but also because of resistance to their rule, to the Zionist project, there have been regular wars that the Israelis have launched, sometimes against the whole Middle Eastern Arab world, sometimes just against targeted, Palestinian people. But each time there's a war, the glare of world publicity comes and has a look at what's happening and how the leaders of Israel are talking and what the Palestinian resistance fighters are saying, all of that. And again, over the years, it's really because of this constant rising up of Palestinian resistance that this information leaks out and leaks out and leaks out. And now we've kind of come to like a tipping point, I think, in terms of the numbers of people who have a very clear idea now of the reality, the truth of what Israel is, who backs it and why the Palestinians have to resist by every means, including by armed means. And remember, back in the 70s, the United Nations was forced to accede that, yes, of course, the Palestinian people have the right to armed resistance. And actually, an occupying power has no right in international law. Right? This has been an internationally recognized truth for a very long time. It got buried for a while, and now it's resurfaced, and very, very strongly because of the way that the imperialist politicians and media have once again assumed that it's okay for them to just do the one-sided narrative and no one will notice. Unfortunately for them, the tipping point has come where all they do by standing with Israel and refusing to countenance, criticizing the Zionist project and the leaders of the Zionist world, is they're exposing themselves in a way that 20 years ago, most people weren't aware that they were doing. Now it's become so glaring. And I think they were unaware of the fact that this tipping point had really come, and it's taken them by surprise, I would say.
Something else, thoughts. I do want to talk about Ukraine, but something else, and that is the way the U.S. empire, they had this grand military machine, and it's collapsing. It is feckless. It is, ridiculous, and we see the same with Israel, and it is the foundation of the U.S. empire's military machine was in its industrial capacity. And through what we'll call neoliberalism, capitalism, whatever, they determined, hey, we can make a lot more profit if we outsource our industry. That's number one. Number two, just like you said about the missiles, if I'm over here saying, if I can make something inexpensive and I can use that to address my military needs, but meanwhile, and people talk about it here in the US, they say, well, these companies that are building missiles for the US, for military, are saying, I don't want to build a missile for $2,000. I want to build a missile for $2 million. I don't want to build a ship for what I think the Russians build a ship for like a third or a quarter of what we build a ship, right? So the very nature of the system weakens its own military, rots itself out, in that the system preys on itself. So interestingly, in a unique, paradoxical kind of way, the way the system works makes itself weaker, if you know what I'm getting at. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a really significant thing, isn't it? What we're looking at now, seeing how this huge military power that is the USA, with its 800 bases around the world, right, and it's trillions of dollars worth of military spending every year. I mean, the numbers are so vast we can't put our heads around them, right? We can't really understand what they mean. But there is the assumption, and has always been the assumption, that what that means is the USA has absolutely overwhelming firepower in the world. It's really interesting. Of course, when the Soviet Union fell, for a moment, that was true. The USA was like, one superpower in the world, it's me, I win. Anybody who tries to stand up to me is toast, right? That was how they felt. That's how they've continued to feel. They've continued to tell themselves that that's how it is, even as China was steadily building its capacities, Russia was picking itself up off the floor and rebuilding its economic and military independence. So they were sort of looking the other way while all that was happening, because they had a story in their head that, oh, we had the superpower, and anyway, we spend trillions, how can anyone match us, right? But you pinpointed something really interesting that I think the recent wars have highlighted, and the war in Ukraine was already highlighting this, and now with Palestine, it's actually being highlighted some more, which is US health spending, US military spending. I was going to make a parallel with health spending, that's why that came out of my head. US military spending does not equate to, dollar for dollar firepower with any of its adversaries. And the fundamental reason, as you pointed out, is privatization and profit. Now, as soon as you bring a private company into the business of providing an essential service, you've done two things. Number one is you've given that company a license to print money, because they know you're going to have to pay whatever they charge for the thing that you've said that you want, right? You've given them the sole contract for this thing, and you need it. So if they say, oh, now it costs $100 instead of $10, you'll pay $100, right? So it's a way for private companies to loot the state treasury, essentially. They're getting just free money from the state. That's what's happening. And you see exactly the same thing with America's health spending. You don't even have a public health service, but your government spends a huge amount on what public health provision has to be subsidized. But the way that they do it is basically they give huge subsidies to private companies for very little return. And we're seeing the same thing in Britain. We have all these privatized, services that used to be public services where the council just provided them and no one was making a profit. Now they've been outsourced to private companies. And what is the incentive for these companies? The incentive for the companies is to give as little as possible and charge as much as possible. I mean, that's ABC of business, right? Where it falls down is when the thing that you are supposedly paying for is something that your whole society relies on to keep itself going. The machinery of imperialism relies on having the imperialist military machine underpinning it. And since they lost the peer competitor of the Soviet Union, I think the US ruling class sort of forgot that. They got used to being able to just shout about how powerful they were and kind of knock over little people, and took that as proof that they're the biggest, strongest, no one can touch us, And, the truth about how sort of hollow a lot of this military spending really is, and how much of it is just money that the Treasury is throwing at corporations for delivering very, very little. And as you said, the built-in intrinsic motivation for everything to be as expensive and high-tech as possible, because that's where you can just massively overcharge for this stuff. And, for it all to be on a contract, it's got to be very complicated that no soldier could possibly just mend their own gun, right? There has to be there have to be software updates. There have to be people who maintain that. There have to be people who will come and service things or they won't work for you. There's a whole load of logistics around that. Again, the companies have a built-in incentive to sell products that come with a contract for servicing. Yeah, you don't just give a product and it's yours, you're done with it. No. It will only work if you also take the service contract, which means, you've got to give it back to us every 6 months and we'll spend 2 months looking after it and then we'll give it, and it's got to be regularly this, that, and the other done to it. So this, of course, is a very good business model. We see it online with software, right? It used to be you bought a piece of software. Now you buy a subscription, It's like they're developing subscription services for the army. you know, these big arms companies, because it's a good model for making money. Do you know what it's not very good for? Not very good for actually winning a war. And especially a war against people who've been working hard to catch up with your technological advantages and overcome them in various ways. Now, the competitors of the USA are not trying to overcome it in terms of aggressive power. They're trying to find the weaknesses and defend against them so that if they are invaded or attacked, they can stand up for themselves. You know, so they have a very different focus. They're not trying to spend all their country's money. You know, they're trying to work out the most efficient way to have high-tech defense. And of course, that's why, you know, even the DPRK has weapons that the USA hasn't developed. You know, supersonic, isn't it? Weapons.
Hypersonic.
I'm really not a weapons geek. Hypersonic.
Yes. Hypersonic, yes.
Weapons. I'm not a weapons geek, so I get those things wrong. But yeah, totally. And, you know, you can make an analogy again with the healthcare situation. You know, why is it that Cuba spends like some hundreds of dollars per head a year on health, and yet the health outcomes in Cuba are way ahead of the health outcomes of the USA, although the USA spends, you know, some insane, you know, 30,000 per head a year on you know, outcomes that are dreadful. You know, it's about the system in which they're doing that. And you're right, you know, you talked about this outsourcing and doing your manufacturing elsewhere. You know, this is not a new thing. Lenin pointed it out, and other people were pointing it out at the turn of the 20th century, that one of the key features of imperialism is the export of capital as opposed to the export of goods. In an earlier stage of colonialism, the colonial powers were factories, and they took their finished goods to the third world, and they brought back raw materials to be processed at home. Then increasingly, the capitalists in the era of imperialism, they moved into exporting capital to set up productive facilities elsewhere because it's cheaper and you make bigger profits. And that, you know, everything is all about trying to maximize profit in a world where profits are actually falling. The rate of profit is declining, and the imperialists try to fight back against that. You know, we talked last week, I think, a little bit about price fixing, cartels and all of that. But there's also the export of capital is one of the ways in which the big capitalists try to fight the declining rate of profit by setting up somewhere where the workers are cheap, the land is cheap, there's, you know, less overheads, and maybe you're close to the source of a certain type of raw material, etc. So in various ways, it's cheaper, and they get super profits from setting up production abroad, higher rate of profit that they then take back home, right? That's the source of the wealth, the weirdly skewed wealth of the imperialist nations as opposed to the rest of the world, because this wealth is being generated in India or China or wherever it might be, and then sucked back, Africa, of course, Latin America, and being sucked back to the heartlands of imperialism to prop up their societies and their kind of social systems. So export of capital isn't new, but totally hollowing out something that strategically you would think you'd have more of a brain than to do, right? During the era when the USA was facing the peer competitor of the Soviet Union and was constantly aware of that, they had to have a machinery of understanding the Soviet Union, thinking about the motivations of the people that they were facing, and of keeping up with them militarily and not letting them get ahead. So that was a serious business. And I think it made them more serious about how they carried that business out. And, you know, the twin effects of, you know, the deepening crisis of the system, the desperation for profits that means that, you know, the arms monopolies, incentives and desires become predominant, combined with this sort of arrogant sense that no one can touch us, we're the biggest, we're the best, meant that they ended up with a kind of skewed vision of what was really happening in the world. They got so used to dismissing everybody, they didn't notice that there are more and more countries in the world that simply can't be dismissed.
Absolutely. One of the things that's going on now is, in the Ukraine conflict is a stark realization amongst those of us who, amongst people who still have some level of grasp on reality, that the Ukraine conflict is coming to a close. I mean, one could argue that it has come to a close from one perspective, in that even the neocons have to now, many of them recognize that Ukraine has no chance of winning, that never really had a chance. I've actually seen an article that said they never had a chance of winning, and I thought, well, there are many of us that said that before the conflict even started. You said, let's not set a country off against a country that's more than 28 times it's bigger than that, because the odds of them winning that conflict are pretty much non-existent. And now there seems a desperation, still an inability to admit to themselves the reality, but at the same time, they're caught in having to choose between Ukraine and Israel, and it's clear that they've said, we can't afford both. We're going to Israel, and whatever happens in Ukraine happens, but we'll try to maintain the narrative. Your thoughts on this whole conflict in Ukraine, where it is, and the dynamic in the imperialists being caught between this luxury project of theirs. Ukraine's a luxury project. We're going to use this and we're going to take out Russia. Oh, this is going to be so fun. And we'll sit back and have tea and biscuits while we watch it. And then all of a sudden, this monster happens in the Middle East, where this is not a tea and crumpets luxury process. This is somebody taking a sledgehammer to imperialism in the Middle East. And at any rate, your thoughts on the imperialists being caught between the devil in the deep blue sea in Ukraine and the Middle East.
I think the drive to war against Russia, like the drive to war against China, are pretty existential issues for US imperialism, for all the imperialists, simply because the crisis in their own system is so deep and they don't have a way out of it. The way out is humongous destruction and humongous looting. Now, humongous destruction, we saw in World War I and World War II, what that looks like. If you destroy enough people and enough cities, then you can get your economy going again by the demand to rebuild, essentially. And you've got rid of a whole load of spare people along the way. So here comes a boom time. Essentially that's the price of recovery from a global economic crisis. You're prepared to take that price every few decades. Let imperialism continue forever, right? That's the price. The other picture, I think, of a recovery is what happened when the Soviet Union fell to the hands of a counter-revolution, and its territory and the territory of all of the East European former People's Republics became looting grounds for the imperialists. And they had a bonanza. They had a field day. And so that gave their system a massive shot in the arm to help them recover from the last crisis. But if you notice that recovery, like the recovery after World War I, was not a recovery that benefited the mass of the people. The mass of the people of the world got poorer while the rich were getting richer during that recovery. The only time a recovery in a period of imperialist crisis has benefited the working class has been the post-World War II recovery, which had a very particular character because of the existence of the USSR. The social bribe that came to workers as part of that recovery was because of the pressure of socialism. It wasn't because that's what happens in a recovery. We're always getting recoveries where, the mass of the people carry on being, suffering unemployment and cuts to their services and being told they've got to pay for bailing out, what happened in the last crisis. Tighten your belts. We're just getting through the next bit. Now it's got worse again. We've got to tighten our belts a bit more. The truth is that the crisis is what drives the imperialists into these wars. And they are desperate to break Russia into pieces, to loot it, to stop it getting in the way of the imperialist ability to loot elsewhere, which of course independent Russia is able to get in their way around the world, not in an aggressive, fighty, imperialist versus imperialist way, simply because it has the economic and military ability to help other countries stand up for themselves. And the USA cannot forgive that. None of the imperialists can forgive that. You know, they're absolutely outraged by the fact not only that Russia is standing up for its own independence, but it's actually helping other countries to do it too. So I don't think it's a kind of nice to have, the destruction of Russia. I think it's quite vital for the imperialists. The problem for them is they've got several vital tasks in front of them. Now, look, if Russia had fallen to their plans, if the economic sanctions war had been successful, you know, we could well right now be living through another, you know, period of imperialist triumphalism as they straddle the world and say, look, no one can stand up to us. Look, this is what happens to you, and got rich off of the riches of the Russian Federation. Very happy that wasn't able to happen for the reasons we've talked about earlier. But yes, you're right. You know, they put so much into trying to bring down Russia militarily, economically, diplomatically. Now they're faced with a situation of finally having to wake up and smell the coffee that they failed. For many people, it was obvious for quite a long time that they were failing and would fail. Now they're realizing they've failed. I think a lot of what we're seeing is, number one, kind of coping strategies, you know, I never thought we were doing anyway. Well, that's sort of, oh, well, I don't care anyway. I don't care what you say. But also a need to create a narrative where they don't say we failed, but they step by step back themselves out in a way where they kind of put the blame onto some lunatics around Zelensky who mismanaged the whole thing or tricked them into it, or I don't know what they'll say in the end. But, you know, you can see them building up step by step kind of stories about Zelensky being isolated and alone, and some of the people around him being lunatics and corrupt and this and that. Remember how they suddenly talked about corruption in Afghanistan? You know, the corruption is their corruption. You know, Zelensky's their tool. The corruption in Ukraine is the US imperialist corruption. It's not Ukrainian corruption, right? But they, of course, their local stooges are involved with it, but it's not created by them. The system of looting Ukraine on behalf of Western imperialism, you know, that's the imperialist system that's been set up there. So yeah, they have to sort of back out from Ukraine slowly, step by step, slowly but surely, and you can see them. Each step backwards they take, they create a narrative around that. They sort of let that settle. Then they take another step back, and there's a kind of a new story. It seems to me the story kind of shifts each time, but if everybody's telling the story, that's all right. You know, the main thing is the kind of narrative management and easing themselves out. But yes, I think it's been very unwelcome for them that the war in Gaza kicked off while they were, you know, still trying to work out what to do about Ukraine. And it's a double whammy, not only to their prestige, but also to their weapons supplies. And you can see lots of worry about that, about how do we actually physically supply two fronts which are very active in a war.
I think you're right, particularly when they voluntarily deindustrialized for profit. And now Europe is being, well, I would say involuntarily deindustrialized, but voluntarily deindustrialized by its ruling elite, involuntary by the working class, who are, you know, unfortunately, too many of them are running around with a blue and yellow flag trying to figure out how they got in this desperate position. But at any rate, Joti Brar, that's been a full hour, and I certainly thank you for another week, for your time. Hopefully, you know, every Friday we will be available I will be available, and any Friday that you're available, we'd love to have you back. Where can people go online to find your organization, to follow you, all that kind of stuff?
Thank you, Garland. Well, you'll see down here, I think it will say thecommunists.org. That's my party's website. Go there for excellent Marxist take on the news. You won't get better in the English language. We also have a Telegram channel called The Communists also. We have a YouTube channel called Proletarian TV. Look for that. It's really, really good. You can find me personally on Telegram. Just search for Joti Brar. You can see that. That's my name, Joti Brar. I think that's the main thing. We're on Twitter and things like that. You'll find us if you look for us.
All right. Well, thank you. And oh, by the way, how's things going with your brother? We know that he was nabbed by the imperialist for the horrible crime of actually passing out accurate literature.
Yeah, I know, shocking. So he's fine. All 4 of the comrades who were arrested are fine, including the young boy who was only 16 and was held for 24 hours in isolation in a cell. Seems a bit hardcore for a little boy who was just standing near some stuff. But they're all fine. And we are just waiting, essentially, to find out. We won't know until February whether the police have decided that they're going to press a charge of incitement to racial hatred. That's what they were arrested for. That is what the police raided their houses at 3 a.m. while they were all in jail to collect evidence. And I guess the police have got till February to sift through their evidence and decide whether or not the crime of inciting racial hatred is going to be prosecuted. Personally, I would love for them to prosecute us for that. Bring it on, and let's have that conversation in public.
Wow, supporting genocide is not illegal. Opposing genocide apparently is a crime that cannot be forgiven. Interesting times we live in. May we live in interesting times, and surely we do. Joti Brar, thank you very much. And everyone, don't forget, you've got the communist.org, her website. You've got all of, she's given you the information. Make sure you follow Joti everywhere, and especially here on Fridays. Make sure you share this on all your social media platforms. You will find a like button there. Please attack the like button, strike the like button, assault the like button. I want to see that like button hit, because let's face it, I'm sure the algorithms for YouTube are not going to be acting on behalf of Garland Nixon and Joti Brar at this point. So try to help us out a little bit. Hit the like button, share this on all your social media platforms. Thank you very much. We are